But as we began, the English word worship is one of those contracted words. And it comes from two words. The one is worth and ship. So something that is worth, it has value, it is worthy. And that's where the word that we have, worship, comes from. And it really is a declaration or a recognition that something has great value. And in fact, more value than ourselves, unless we're worshiping ourselves, which is something that people do worship. They will worship themselves, they will worship others, and really it's the thing that they are saying is of greatest value. The thing that they want to put their money, their time, their attention, their focus to. That is worship. Because you are saying that is what's really worth my effort. And some people think, well, it's myself, that I am worth that. As we come to God, it really becomes, as I have here in this second point, that it's a giving of ourself, our very self in all of us. Our money, our love, our time, our strength, our attention, our focus, and all of our life to God. That's what worship is. It's a giving to God. And we'll look at how this works itself out. But a key verse here comes from Romans chapter 12 and verse 1. It says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy." So that means looking at the goodness and the mercy that God has had on us. So looking at that, so in view of that, what we need to do is, he says, I urge you to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. So offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. So think about, what were the sacrifices? What happened to the sacrifices in the Old Testament?
Killed.
They were killed. And then what happened? They burned them. Why were they killed?
For the blood. The blood needed to be shed.
Okay, the blood was being shed. What were they being brought to? Who were they being brought to and given to?
God. Well,
to God. Yeah. The sacrifices were brought to God and said, "Here, God, we are going to give you this sacrifice as a gift." And so they would kill that, and some different sacrifices had different things that they did and had different meanings. Some of the first two sacrifices were the sin offering and the guilt offering, and we'll look at that a little bit later, but just to state, the sin offering, they would put their hand, in fact, on almost all of the offerings, the people, as they would give the sacrifices, they would put their hand on that animal as a way to associate themselves with that animal. Their guilt and their sin in the sin offering would be put onto that animal, and this animal would be killed in their place. Now, the sin offering and the guilt offering are what Jesus did as he took our sin, your sin and my sin, and he carried it on himself. He took our sin, it was put onto him, he bore it, and he was killed. So the sacrifices, here it says to present or to offer your body as a living sacrifice. So God isn't asking us to kill ourselves. just to make that clear. But what he is saying is that there's this giving, a whole giving, because the sacrifices, there was the sin offering, then the guilt offering, and the third one was the burnt offering. And in the burnt offering, in all of the other offerings, they would take and they would kill the animal, and they would take out certain parts of it. They would take out some of the organs. They would wash it on the inside, and then they would only burn certain parts of it. They didn't burn the whole thing. They would burn the fat. The blood would be poured out. And in fact, just in my reading this morning in Leviticus 3, it says, the blood, don't eat the blood and fat because they belong to God. That was part of the sacrifice that was given to God. But also certain parts were given, but not the whole animal. It was killed, but then like the priests were given some of the leg and different parts of it. That was their food because the priests didn't work. So a part of that sacrifice went to them. But not so with the burnt offering. The burnt offering, they would take the whole animal, all of its parts, place it, arrange it on the altar, and it would be wholly burnt. And this, what Paul is talking about here to the Romans, is a reflection of that offering, the burnt offering, which is a whole sacrifice, giving everything that we have, all that we are. So offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. So he's giving some definition of how we do that. So how do we give our bodies to God?
Living holy lifestyle.
Okay, part of it is living holy. That is being set apart. Not just living as the world does, but living unto God. Holy and pleasing to God. So making an effort that we please Him in our life. And then he says, this, and the NIV has translated this different ways. The version of the NIV that I pulled this from, it says, this is your true and proper worship. The NIV that I have says, this is your spiritual act of worship. Though it can also be translated, this is your reasonable act of worship. This is, if you want to know what worship is, this is a definition of worship. It is giving your life to God completely. And that means living it in such a way as to please Him in holiness, set apart for Him. So we're going to take a look at some of what that would entail here as we look at the next sections. So when we think of worship, some of the definition that we often think of is singing, right? So praise and worship. And that's a part of it, because in that time of worship, we are giving our focus, our attention, we're ascribing worth to God and saying, God, you are worthy. And so if that is a true statement from our mouth and not just words that are coming off of our tongue, we're just reading it or going through the motions, then that becomes true worship. It's not true worship if we're just reading words, but not really thinking about what the words mean. So a true worship in that form requires that we're considering what is being said, and we are saying that from our heart. So in the Old Testament, there were a number of forms that God gave them as worship, and then there's parallels in the New Testament.